Faith is an act of trust. Faith softens the hardened heart. Faith grants us perseverance when all is not well. Faith is both a gift shared and a gift received. Faith need not be a static state, but like Advent, is also a coming into being, a becoming, a seeking, a journeying. And so it is. We begin our Advent journey today with the kindling of the first light. To kindle a light is to ignite, to make bright, to light up. And so we dare to animate our lives, our journeys this season with faith, hope, love, and joy. And so as we turn our gaze towards the Advent wreath, I invite Stella Miller to light the candle of faith.
Hello, my name is K. Mary Reddy. Please join me in the responsive reading, which is in your program. May our faith be a gentle and courageously chosen way. For faith Faith will indeed bring us closer to shalom. The faithfulness asks us to wrestle honestly, to question and to doubt. Let us not be tempted by a faith held without this struggle. May our faith be one that is ever renewed and ever renewed.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Fountain Street Church. I'm the other half of K. Mary and Jim Reddick. I'm Jim. K. Mary and I have been attending Fountain Street Church for about a year. We moved down here from the Upper Peninsula, where we were members of a small Unitarian Universalist fellowship. The reason we came down here was to become grandparents. Our granddaughter Lily is now 18 months old, and we provide the daycare for her. I take care of her on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. K. Mary takes care of her on Monday and Friday, and it is a real joy. So here we are in Fountain Street Church, which is a whole lot different than a 30-member fellowship that met and does continue to meet in an art center. So because of the fact that we're from a smaller congregation, we generally go to the 9:45 early service, which is far more interactive, and we have enjoyed our experiences there. The Reverend Jason Hubbard has interaction with the people who attend, the congregants, and the congregants themselves have more interaction. And we get to beat tambourines with the music, which is folk rock music, and which we love. So here we are in this giant church that has a mission. The mission stated by three maxims: free the mind, grow the soul, and change the world. Well, what does that mean? It means something for each one differently, I suspect. When I think of free the mind, I think of expanding one's thinking. And when I come to church every Sunday, it does expand my thinking. I look at things a little bit differently. And hopefully that'll get me through the week and thinking about things other than what is normally a part of commerce. Now, grow the soul, that's a tougher one. I've always been challenged by what is this business called soul? And I like to look up here and look at these angels. I mean, holy man, angels that's really kind of difficult from my intellectual perspective. So I integrate that. This church, as I understand it, years ago was a Baptist church, and it didn't become what it is today because the Baptist church just kind of went out of business, and this building was bought by somebody else, at least so I think. The people who have been in this church for years and years, for decades, changed. They expanded their mind, they grew their soul. So I like to think that these angels represent not necessarily these supreme beings up in the sky, but they really represent us, who are really trying to become angels. We are trying to become that type of a person that is kinder and more gentle and can help others. That's how I view Grow the Soul. So if you can do that, if you can expand your mind and you can grow your soul, well, the next thing is you're supposed to do, and I think it's a good idea, is to try to change the world. Well, how do you go about doing that? Well, if your mind's freer and your soul has been grown, you can go out and just by being a better person, being a kinder person, you can change the world. That's one way. But another way that this church embraces is deeds rather than creeds. Rather than trying to tell people what to do, the people in this church try to help others through their deeds. And that's usually done in smaller groups. The group that we have become most associated with is Embody GR, which is essentially a free yoga class with a lot more on Wednesdays. And in that class, we have a motto, feel better and do good. Well, the way we feel better is that we do the exercise, but we also share our joys and concerns in that group. And the third thing that we do is that we associate with other organizations and provide projects that help the community. So that's how we've integrated our experience in this church. So we like it here, and we hope that, and we know that the people that have been here for years like it, and we hope that the newcomers here will embrace it as well. So after the service, we encourage people to have coffee and make Christmas ornaments. But also for the newcomers, look around, snoop around, you'll learn what goes on here. You'll see some beautiful art. And introduce yourself and ask questions, because people here aren't really like touchy-feely that they're going to be giving you hugs like they do in some churches in order to get you to join. I think. You've been there. But we find that if you introduce yourself, you ask questions, the people here are very friendly, and I encourage you to become more involved in the smaller groups. Thank you.
My God's almighty The story that I want to share with you is a poem by Ogden Nash. It's called The Boy Who Laughed at Santa Claus. It's a morality fable with laughter. In Baltimore, there lived a boy. He wasn't anybody's joy, and though his name was Jabez Dawes, his character was full of flaws. In school, he never led his classes. He hid old ladies' reading glasses. His mouth was open while he chewed, and elbows to the table glued. He stole the milk of hungry kittens and walked through doors marked no admittance. He said he acted thus because there wasn't any Santa Claus. Another trick that tickled Jabez was crying boo at little babies. He brushed his teeth, they said in town, sideways instead of up and down. Yet people pardoned every whim and viewed his antics with a grin till they were told by Jabez Dawes there isn't any Santa Claus. Deploring how he did behave, his parents quickly sought their grave. They hurried through the portals pearly, and Jabez left the funeral early. Like whooping cough from child to child, he sped to spread the rumor wild. Sure as my name is Jabez Dawes, there isn't any Santa Claus. Slunk like a weasel or a martin through nursery and kindergarten, and whispering low to every tot, there isn't any, no, there's not. No pipe, no beard, no pipe, no scarlet clothes, no sparkling eyes, no cherry nose, no sleigh, and furthermore, by Jiminy, nobody coming down the chimney. The children wept all Christmas Eve while Jabez chortled up his sleeve. No infant dared hang up his stocking for fear of rabies. Jabez ribbled mocking. He sprawled on his untidy bed, fresh malice dancing in his head, when presently, with scalp a-tingling, Jabez heard a distant jingling. He heard the sound of sleigh and hoof crisply alighting on the roof. What used to rise and bar the door, a shower of soot was on the floor. Jabez beheld, oh, awe of awe's, a fireplace full of Santa Claus. Then Jabez fell upon his knees with cries of, "Don't! And pretty please," he said, "I don't know where you read it. I swear some other fellow said it." "Jabez," replied the angry saint, "it isn't I, it's you that ain't. Although there is a Santa Claus, there isn't any Jabez Dawes." Said Jabez then with impudent vim, "Oh yes, there is, and I am him. Your language don't scare me, it doesn't." And suddenly he found he wasn't. From curling toes to unkempt locks, Jabez became a jack-in-the-box, an ugly toy in Santa's sack, mounting the flue on Santa's back. The neighbors heard his mournful squeal. They searched for him, but not with zeal. No trace was found of Jabez Dawes, which led to thunderous applause, and people drank a loving cup and went and hung their stockings up. All you who sneer at Santa Claus, beware the fate of Jabez Dawes, the saucy boy who told the saint off. The child who got him licked his paint off. And there ends the reading. I'm especially grateful for the responsive reading this morning, which reminds us that even in our most joyous and festival times, that we should also never relinquish our spiritual challenge to look deeper than we might, to range further than we would. The allures of the comfortable are always very present. In Advent, the season is one of preparation of the soul, not just of one's home and one's calendar and one's tree. In the Christian scripture, Jesus remarks in Mark, this is the called for reading for today. Speaking of faith, it is like a man going on a journey when he leaves home and puts his servants in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to be on watch. Therefore, keep awake, for you do not know when the master will be coming, in the evening or at midnight or at cockcrow or at dawn, or else he may find you asleep when he comes suddenly. And what I say to you, I say to all, stay awake. In the passage of the Torah called for this week, this passage from the prophet Hosea is paired, and I thought this particular line would be useful. You'll run into it later. He who is wise will consider these words. He who is prudent will take note of them. For the paths of God are smooth. The righteous can walk on them while sinners stumble. So you just put those in your mental pocket for a few minutes. I'm looking now back at a date, in this case, New Year's Eve, 1978. I wasn't here. I'd say a fair number of you weren't here. Not only are some of us too young or predate Fountain Street Church, it is the Sunday when most people would say, oh, I was just at church last week on Christmas Eve. I don't need to go again. It's one of the lowest attended services of the year, the Sunday after Christmas Eve. After all, we've pretty much got our fill of religion a few days earlier. But that was the day, December 31st, a Sunday in 1978, that Duncan Littlefair, the longest-serving clergyman in this church's history, announced his retirement. He was 65 years old, but far from declining. He would live another 25 years and even in retirement exert a powerful presence. But when a candidate was being considered for the job some months later, Duncan took him to lunch and said, "You may become the preacher, but this is my church and it will be until I die." This was reported to me by another clergy person, not by a member, I should point out. And in fact, he did die in 2004, having outlived and outlasted two successors. My task is more daunting than usual today because it is the first Sunday of Advent, which explores the meanings of faith, hope, love, and joy, and has for 2 generations a practice put in place by Duncan Littlefair and maybe his most durable and endearing legacy. And I will talk about faith, but there's also 25 years of Fountain Street Church history that have taken place since 1978, 79. It's unwritten, unlike the rest of that history, a history, though, that deserves to be noticed, because this church and liberal religion itself have changed in a quarter of a century. So I'm going to start with that story. David Rankin, Duncan's successor, arrived here in 1982, and he brought a contemplative spirit to this pulpit. Where Duncan was known to pronounce, David pondered. He was Duncan's opposite in several ways. He was more introverted than extroverted, more collaborative than commanding. But you could also say the two of them were complementary, yin and yang. Many a church has sought someone who had everything the previous preacher did not. But like Duncan, I said, he was reluctant to take on the task. Duncan was reluctant, for he thought the church might be on the death's door and he would go down with the ship. David wrote, in the 1980s, Fountain Street Church was essentially healthy, yet it was also smug, defensive, complacent, and resistant to change. He wrote this in the 1990s, I should point out. The average pledge, he writes, was among the lowest in the Western world. The membership roll included the dead of Flagstaff, Arizona, and the Social Action Committee would be comfortable meeting in a phone booth. Last week, I noted that many of the most memorable parts of Duncan's tenure were things done by his colleagues, Bertie Reeser, Bev Howerton, and Jack Bowers. By the time David Rankin arrived, spiritual entrepreneurship was in the zeitgeist of this place. Character School wrote a book called Seeds, compiled from children and adults. Women created their own spirituality program, and some of them still go on. The Choice Fund became organized to help women seeking abortions who could not afford them. Book clubs and dinner groups and Gentlemen Around 70, usually called GAS, Men's Poker and Philosophy, the Poetry Group, all which started perhaps in Duncan's day, continued long after he retired and flourished, often grew. Adult education became almost an institution, a church unto itself in a way, but it had a catalog more suited to a college than a church. Thanks to Bruce Bodie, a successor both in fact and in character to Jack Bowers, the Sue Cinnamon's work, upwards of 400 children were here on a given Sunday. Jim Culver, whose work you will hear at the end of this service, and Jack Kimmel, who is still a member of this church, composed music for this church, often set to words by Adrian Sweats, a member of this church. Don Hoekstra, one of our clergy, held a Bible class it was church for those who went. Sometimes they even discussed the Bible. It seems we truly followed Joseph Campbell's advice to follow our bliss. Liberal religion, in general, was doing the same thing, begetting subjects like feminist theology and eco-theology and liberation theology and neo-pagan spirituality, just 4 easy examples of a proliferation of varieties. Just as Fountain Street Church was no longer just the lengthened shadow of Duncan Littlefair, liberal religion became something more than Protestantism with a PhD. Institutions, though, seem to swing between charismatic unity and diffuse liberty. The power of the former is obvious in people like Duncan, these charismatic presences who hold people enraptured with their very presence. But there's also something commanding in its own way about a thriving community where you can dive in and join at any location or create something of your own. Large churches especially seem to swing from one to the other and back again. But you can feel that pendulum swinging in your own life if you pay attention. Childhood begins with the adoring despotism of parents. And then when we become adults, we can't wait to make them backseaters to our lives, pushing them away and asserting our independence. Then we swing back toward adoration when we fall in love with someone who becomes the whole world to us. And then we discover they're not gods or goddesses, and we have to reassert a little independence and individuality. In religion, almost all of us at some point in our youth prayed to a God, if only to be delivered from being discovered by our parents. And then we discovered those magical stories that held us enthralled somehow weren't adding up with the reality that we saw, and God did not always deliver on the miracles we needed for lost homework and bullies. Yes, I am talking about faith now. I've moved from history to the experience of faith, and that is the theme of the first Sunday in Advent. Religion usually understands faith as saying, I believe thus thing, that I have faith in, a theological construct. But in fact, as my colleague pointed out earlier, faith has its origins in a concept more earthy, trust. Actually, we should translate it almost as loyalty. Have you ever heard of the dog named Fido? It comes from the Latin word fides, meaning faithful, friend. And likewise, when two people get married, they often pledge fidelity or faithfulness, which doesn't mean they believe the other is God. It means that I will be true, trusting, loyal, dependable. We know that faith is that simple, but it isn't that easy. The real question is, what is your loyalty? It's loyalty to something. And that's really what faith is about. Everyone has something to which they are ultimately loyal. Ralph Waldo Emerson pointed out years ago, a person will worship something, of that there is no doubt. We are all faithful to something. The question is whether we know what that faith is. We all know those who go to church, who say all the words piously, but when the scripture says you cannot serve two masters, God and money, they seem to go deaf. Others here talk about rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's and what is God's to God, but still think their religion should be Caesar's law. These and other hypocrisies of true believers in the true church are a large part of the decline of religion in America these days. 20% of Americans have no religion and don't want one. Now, before you smile too widely, they don't want us either. I mention them because they describe their experience, if you ask them, as a kind of awakening. Many of you know what they mean. A moment or a time, a process when you woke up and realized the world was different than you believed, imagined, trusted, that the world in some ways betrayed you, or maybe that you had not seen it the way it was. The gospel reading this morning talks about waking up, but in the opposite sense of don't go to sleep for fear you will miss the important thing. But for some people, waking up is when they, quote, lose their religion. Isn't it odd how we can use the same metaphor of waking up to describe both having faith and losing it? Or maybe it's not so odd when we think about it. We literally spend a third of our lives asleep, a state that is necessary to our physical, emotional well-being. To be human is to be both asleep and awake, presumably not at the same time. Have we not all had dreams that when we woke up seemed still present? There are tales of people having dreams and they wake up and they have a solution to their problem that they've been thinking about for days, if not weeks. Or conversely, we've all had sleepless nights for whatever reason, and the next day we felt like we couldn't wake up. We were so befogged by the lack of sleep. I think we need both sleep and waking to be human, and I think we need both belief and unbelief to have faith. There is a passage in the gospel in which a man confesses to Jesus, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. Have we not all felt that experience of both believing and not believing, of trusting and not trusting, doubt and certainty, fact and fancy? A songwriter friend, Shelley Jackson Denham, writes in one of our hymn texts that faith is a forest in which doubts play and hide. Doesn't that describe your experience? It certainly describes mine. There are days when I'm absolutely sure I know what is, and days when I'm absolutely sure I do not. Doubt seems to be part of faith. It is not apart from it. It's not the opposite of it. It's included in it. My favorite philosopher, William James, speaks of being open to the ever not quite of our experience. What he means is that no matter what we see or experience, it's ever not quite the whole picture. Partly because we only have 2 eyes and 2 ears and we can't be omnipresent. No matter how much we perceive or experience, it's not the whole. It cannot be the whole. Similarly, no matter what we think we know, it might change the next time we get back there. I remember a passage by one of my other favorite scholars, a Dutchman named Gerardus van der Leeuw. I love that name. In writing about how one should study another religion, he writes, when told that the world rides on the back of a great feathered serpent, one ought to be able to half believe it is true. Ogden Nash's Jabez Dawes was a fundamentalist who was completely sure, wasn't he? There wasn't any Santa Claus. He was a true unbeliever, as true as any true believer, undone by his certainty because it turned out the world was a little larger than his boy's mind. He was a fundamentalist about Christmas, wasn't he? Charles Schulz's Snoopy, you may remember, sat atop his doghouse typing when Charlie Brown came up to him and said, I hear you're writing a book about theology. I hope you have a good title. Snoopy, in his thought balloon, says, I have the perfect title. Has it ever occurred to you that you might be wrong? There, friends, is the nature of faith in its purest, simplest, most honest moment. Certainty is the opposite of faith. If it mistakes the half for the whole, to think that sleep is waking or that waking is sleeping, an honest faith, one worth our loyalty and trust, is one that remembers whatever we perceive is ever not quite. It is remembering there is always more than we know and more than anything we can know, and that we need to be open to that more of reality. That's a sweet place. I should end my sermon right there, but I can't. I can't because this is the Sunday after the grand jury has decided that a police officer is not responsible in a criminal sense for the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. What could be more contrary to the spirit of this Sunday than to drag it into the current events of today, the grim facts of our racial tension? But I want you to consider this. African Americans and other communities are telling us that the law is not being applied justly. And we who are among the fortunate and the privileged are asleep to that reality. Wake up, they are saying in their protests. Wake up to the world we see, not just the world you dream. They may say it loudly and angrily. Why? Because have you ever had your mother wake you up and start by tapping you on the shoulder and then rubbing you a little on the forehead and finally ringing a bell or banging a frying pan until you roused from your slumber? The anger and the violence of Ferguson and the protests everywhere are happening because we have not been paying attention as a nation. We have refused to wake up. Because I believe they are right, that we who are in the white majority are asleep to the reality that is lived by people of color. It's not really about this instance or that police officer or that young man. It is about one police officer after another and one black man after another, time and again being swept away as being not crimes or not worthy of our attention or ignored. We are being told that our point of view is a dream, not theirs. And if faith is being open to more than we think we know, to the ever not quite of our own knowledge, and the possibility of being wrong, not believing our black neighbors and citizens is to not believe in them. It is to break trust, to break faith with those who are asking in their honest anger to be paid attention to. It is, in the end, faithless on our part not to take the struggles of those we do not understand as seriously as our own. I implore us, we in this room, this church, wherever it is, our community certainly, and of course our nation, to take a leap of faith and believe those who are telling us something is wrong, to believe in them, that there is truth in their anger, and that when we get torn up by the violence is wrong and we shouldn't be having riots, you're right. You should be asking, why should they have to have a riot in the first place to get our attention? Reminding us that America is more than we hear, see, more than we hear, know, and that voices are telling us, sleepers, wake. He who is wise will consider these words, says the prophet Hosea. He who is prudent will take note of them. And on that difficult note, I must say, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight, thou who art my rock and my Redeemer. Amen and amen.